All right, hello everybody. Does everybody hear me? Yeah. Oh, perfect. Woo. Hi. So, good evening everyone. My name is Becca Folsom, and I am the coordinator for our Historic Presentation Night program here at the museum. I am also the membership manager, so if you have any questions about that, please let me know. I'd like to welcome you all to this evening's program. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. I do have a few museum-related announcements before we get started with this evening's program. So this month, we are participating in a membership swap with the Great Lakes Museum in Toledo, Ohio. So if you are a member here at Michigan Flight Museum and you have your little membership card, you can go down there throughout the month of May, show your card, and redeem free admission to the Great Lakes Museum throughout May. It's a really, really cool museum. It's a perfect time to go. They have 2 ships that are open now for the season, so you can go through those for free as well as part of this membership swap. So yep, 2 ships that you can walk through in addition to their exhibit gallery that they have down there in Toledo. Another really cool thing too, if you have been a member for a while, you are aware that we have Flyable aircraft, and this weekend is the start of our Flyable aircraft season. So we actually will be in Toledo this weekend at the Toledo Air Show with the C-47 and the B-25. If you are interested in flying this weekend, they are selling tickets down there. But throughout the summertime, we will be flying all 3 of our aircraft from May until early October. That flight schedule is available on the website, and if you have questions, I help out with the passenger operations of that side of things as well. So you can give me a call if you want to purchase a ticket. Speaking of air shows, we have our air show coming up in a little over a month. So Thunder Over Michigan is happening June 20th through 22nd. And we would love to see you there right here at Little Run. Members of Michigan Flight Museum do get a discount on the tailgate car pass. I have a fancy little code. If you haven't gotten it in your email or in the mail, I can let you know if you are a member. If you are not a member, I'm happy to answer questions and help you join if you are interested. We'd love to have you. We have Historic Presentation Nights the first Wednesday evening of most months, with the exception being January. So we'd love to see you. I see a lot of familiar faces, so again, thank you so much for supporting us here at the museum. If you are not already subscribed to our email blast list, we have an e-blast that sends out information about upcoming museum events, sales, all the fun stuff. If you want to sign up for that, please let me know and I can help you out with that. Before I introduce our tonight's speaker, our volunteer coordinator, Tom, has something to say.
Good evening. I just wanted to actually enlist your help. We have a couple volunteer positions that we're having some difficulty in filling. And I guess I'd like each of you just to be aware of this so you could reach out to your family members, business associates, friends, enemies, whomever, to help us fill some of these positions. We are looking for helicopter mechanics and aircraft mechanics. These are the guys that keep our aircraft flying. Even though we're already in flying season, we simply need more help over at our Aeronautics Center. In addition, one of our longest running restoration projects is that of the PB-4Y Privateer, which is over in the bomber plant. And Joe Amond and his swashbuckling crew have told me that they have a need for, and I quote, someone with strong sheet metal fabricating experience. So we'd just ask you again to get the word out that we have such a need. Outside on the table, there are some flyers that have more detail about these positions. And if you have any questions, I'll be around after the presentation. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Tom. All right, just one other thing, maybe 2. I'd like to ask everyone in the audience to silence their phones for this evening's program. Don't forget to, I know we still have some books still available in the gift shop, so if you haven't purchased them yet, the Soaring to Glory books, they are available in the gift shop, and I will let our gift shop manager know that we probably will have to order more, so that's a good sign. Please help me in welcoming tonight's speaker, Dr. Brian Smith, President and CEO of the Tuskegee Airmen National Historical Museum. All right.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
It's good to see your smiling faces. One thing that has impressed me is all the young people that are here this evening. They're sitting in the back, and I assume they're going to be future aviators or people interested in aviation. Is that correct, young lady?
Yes!
I like to see that. And there is actually a young man from one of our programs here. If you'll stand, he's a flight student in Detroit. So there are two museums with the same goal in mind: keep the history alive and accurate, and get young people involved in aviation. Now, I am no Harry Stewart. He was actually my hero, and I realize I'm standing in his stead tonight. And so I'll do my best. And I'll try to have some question and answer at the end. So I'd like to start with what life was like in the pre-World War II era. And, from the perspective of an African American. This was a time when there was a lot of segregation, separate water fountains and bathrooms, and African American men were made to feel less than men at that time. So they always had something to prove, or try to prove, that they were just as good and could be productive in America if given a chance. So that's one of the things that made the Tuskegee Airmen as excellent as they were. Now comes the winds of war. Roosevelt knew that the sentiment in America was, we do not want to get involved in another war. World War I was horrible, and supposedly the war to end all wars. So the sentiment in America was, do not get involved in the war. However, Roosevelt knew if a war started, because you had a couple crazy guys, scheming to take over the world, doing bit by bit, and if no one said anything, they would continue on. That was Hitler for sure. So he started preparing America for war. And one of the things he did was create the civilian pilot training program. This was a program that was at all of the universities and colleges around America, except for the historically black colleges and universities. There was a effort by the black press to get this program at the historically black colleges and universities, and Congress granted it, but without the funding. And it was a student from Howard University who threatened a lawsuit. The lawsuit was prepared, and the government relented and funded 9 HBCUs to actually teach young men and young ladies how to fly. For every 10 males, the program required 1 female to be trained. And that's where the WASP come from. They were learning how to fly while they were in college, like the young ladies in the back here. So that's started airmen. Tuskegee Airmen came from the civilian pilot training programs. That's why the first cohort had degrees. So they had pilot licenses and degrees. They were well educated. Most of America's first pilots in World War II were educated. As the war went on, the need became so great they lowered the standard. And when Harry Stewart came along, he didn't even have a high school diploma. So the cadets had to go to Tuskegee Institute at the time and take courses so they could properly read a map, do quick math in their heads to keep ahead of the aircraft that they were about to fly. So that's where a lot of the airmen came from. Now we have the call to arms. So Pearl Harbor happens, and America is saying, all right, they attacked us, now we're going to go and fight. And no one in America disagreed. Well, very few disagreed. When we were attacked, it was like, yes, we gotta deal with this. And then Germany declared war on America. So now we're all involved. Now there's a call to arms. And African Americans are left out of this. Why? Because of a 1925 War College study. Anyone have heard of that War College study? It was a study to study the effectiveness of the African American in combat. Now they forgot all about the Revolutionary War, the Civil War. They forgot about the war where Roosevelt stormed San Juan Hill. They forgot about World War I. And we'll talk about World War I. African American soldiers were trained, sent over to Europe, stripped of their American uniforms, put into a work detail. They weren't even going to fight. They were just behind the lines somewhere working. I don't know, I may have been, knowing what was going on, I may have been happy with that, because by the end of the war I could go home. But they wanted to fight. And the French needed men. So they were put into French uniforms and fought bravely. We're talking the highest medal that the French government can give a soldier. Many of the African Americans came home with that medal around their neck or pinned to their uniform. Equivalent to the Congressional Medal of Honor. But the 1925 War College forgot that. And it concluded that African Americans were not going to be brave in battle. They would turn tail and run or panic. They didn't have the intelligence to man the complex equipment that America was producing at the time, especially that P-51. So their job would be to be cooks, waiters, truck drivers, folks that loaded and unloaded ships. And again, I may have been happy with that, because at the end of the war, I would probably come home. Being in combat is something else. Now, I say that from the perspective that my father was a combat medic, and at the age of 12 sat me down and told me his story from the moment he got his draft letter to the moment he came home. And in between that time, he was a guest of Hitler in Stalag 7A. He was captured in northern Italy, and his story is at the World War II Museum in New Orleans. If you just Google on Rothacker Smith, you'll see his story. So he told me, he was the first one to tell me about the Tuskegee Airmen. And they weren't even called Tuskegee Airmen at that time. This is the early 60s in Alabama. He sat me down and told me about these black men who could fly. And when I got to Detroit in the early 80s, or actually late 70s, that's when I met Alexander Jefferson. How many of us remember Alexander Jefferson? That was the first airman that I met. And because my father had sat me down and made me listen to his story over several months, I had to do the same thing with Alexander Jefferson. So I went to his house, and I had him tell me his story. And then he invited me to a chapter meeting of the Detroit chapter of Tuskegee Airmen. And there I met all the other airmen. Ward L. Polk, who some of you may remember was longtime president of Tuskegee Airmen National Museum, who I am succeeding. I had to go to their homes and listen to their stories, and then I got the appeal that our friend here made. We need volunteers, and you're going to be put to work. So my first job was selling books, and it went from there to here I am today. So that's how I learned about the airmen and a lot of their stories. That hopefully I can tell you some of them. So we were relegated to these menial tasks, and we didn't like it. So we started to protest. And it was the Black Press, Pittsburgh Courier, I'm sure the Michigan Chronicle in Detroit had something to say about that. And Eleanor Roosevelt was the president's wife, as you realize, but she was in Tuskegee for a meeting of a foundation that supported Tuskegee University. And Chief Anderson was out flying with students in the civilian pilot training program. And she said, oh, they told me that these black guys couldn't fly. I'm gonna go get a ride. So she got a ride, and that hit the press, and she talked to her husband, and they started the Tuskegee Airmen in March of '42. It was just a group of guys who were going to be mechanics that were started in Rantoul, Illinois, and then they shipped down to Tuskegee. They slept in tents because nothing had been built yet. And it wasn't until July that the pilots started to train, July of '42. And they said, we'll just start a squadron. In World War II, you had fighter groups. And fighter groups were composed of 3 fighter squadrons. So we're just going to start the 99th. It will be a fighter squadron. So they started training. And the training was the same that everyone else got. They used the same manuals, the same airplanes, the same books. All the plotters, like the E6B, were given to the Tuskegee Airmen. So they had everything similar, even the same tests. So now you could compare them with any other pilot anywhere else in the military system. And passing was passing. So the first airplane that would fly would be the Stearman, the PT-13 or the PT-17. After guys started ground looping that airplane, they said, oh, we're tearing it up, so we're going to try another one. So they got the PT-19. Now the reason you ground loop the Stearman is because the gear is so close together that it's very easy to get off center. The PT-19 gear was a little farther apart, so it was easier to land. But instead of landing it easier, they would hit hard and punch the gear up through the wing. So it was a metal gear bolted onto a wooden wing. And that was costly to repair, so we went back to the Stearman. And that's why you see early in the war, Stearmans painted yellow and blue. And the end of the war, they were just gray. Because they didn't want to have the expense of all the painting, they just painted them gray. Almost like the primer. So our museum has 2 of those. We have a PT-13 and a PT-17 that actually has history at Tuskegee, at Moton Field. So they did the first 9 weeks in the primary trainers at Moton Field, then they transferred over to Tuskegee Army Airfield where they flew the PT-13 and then the T-6. So these were the airplanes that they trained in. And finally, the 99th was ready to go overseas. They didn't quite know what to do with them because it's just one squadron. Now they've got to attach them to a fighter group that has all white pilots. And they went to North Africa and were attached to a group, I forget the number, but these guys realized, hey, we're going to be in combat. These guys are going to have to watch my back, or I'm going to have to watch theirs. Let's tell them all we know. So they were very kind to the 99th and taught them how to be good combat pilots. That was a good relationship. While this was going on back at Tuskegee, they were forming the 332nd Fighter Group. That's how we recognize the Tuskegee Airmen today as the 332nd Fighter Group. So now the 332nd is going overseas. Now we have another group of black guys. We can take the 99th and attach it to the 332nd. Here's another thing that made the Tuskegee Airmen a cut above is we said a fighter group has 3 fighter squadrons. The 332nd had 4. They could put up 16 more airplanes in the air to help protect the bombers. And they had guys who had some combat experience to help the new squadrons of the 332nd get acclimated to combat. They switched from the P-40, which was an excellent airplane at low altitude, to the P-47. And guys loved the P-47 because you could shoot off a jug. For those of you who know what a jug is, it's one of the cylinders. P-47 had 18 cylinders, and one or two could be shot up, and the airplane still fly. The P-51 was so delicate, you just have to punch a hole in a coolant line, and you're coming down. The engine's going to quit. So for ground attack, Harry Stewart loved the P-47. For aerial combat, he wanted the P-51. Those were his two favorite airplanes. And the airplane he didn't get to fly was the F-4 Corsair. And he, 2 years ago, he was still salivating about flying the F-4 Corsair. So now they're in Italy, in Ramatelli. And just so you know, late in April, there was a celebration over there. The 80th anniversary, they were commemorating and celebrating all the fighter groups that were there. And I didn't realize there were so many other fighter groups in Ramatelli. I visited Ramatelli in '95 and didn't realize until just this year that there was a white fighter squadron, an Italian fighter squadron, I think another fighter squadron, all in the same area. And the cities over there were celebrating all of those fighter squadrons, putting up monuments at the airfields where they launched from. They were attached to the 15th Air Force and pretty much flew over the Adriatic Sea into Germany and other parts of Europe to hamper the war effort of the Germans. So this is another area where the airmen come into excellence in escorting the bombers. To be an ace was, I don't know, almost as good as having the Congressional Medal of Honor. And if you could be an ace 2 or 3 times, I mean, you were just hot stuff. It seems like all of the men in early aviation in America were aces. You have Chuck Yeager, Bob Hoover, Bob Crossfield, all these guys, World War II aces. No Tuskegee Airmen never got ace. And that's because they were ordered to stay with the bombers. Their commander, Benjamin O. Davis, said, if you don't stay with the bomber, you're going to be court-martialed. I didn't know what the punishment would be, but just the idea of being court-martialed was not a good thing. So they had to stay with the bomber. And that's how they amassed such an excellent record of only losing 25 bombers in 225 missions. Now you may have heard, oh, they never lost a bomber. Well, that's true. They never lost a bomber in 200 missions, but those last 25. And I had the dubious pleasure of being the national president of Tuskegee Airmen Incorporated when the national historian brought this up. He said, you guys, we lost bombers. They were bragging about, oh, we never lost a bomber. But they left off the last part of that sentence. And you should have seen the uproar in the room. I never saw a bomber go down. And, well, you know, the bomber stream is 100 miles long. You may have missed it. So they argued back and forth in an open forum, and I said, wait a minute, stop. What we're going to do is ask the hotel if we can have a room. And I'm going to put you original airmen in that room, and y'all are going to talk it out and come out with a decision. What you're going to do, how you're going to tell America about this. And they did. They went to the room, they came out and said, we're going to tell the truth, we lost bombers. And that started at about 2004. Telling the truth that we did lose 25 bombers in those 225 missions. Now, no other fighter squadron in World War II can claim that. Not even anywhere near. They can claim ace. Yeah, we got several aces in our squadron, but they can't say, I helped so-and-so get home so that he now has grandchildren. Now, I was in Seattle and parking in a parking lot. A guy parked in front of me, and I saw 15th Air Force emblem in his window. So when he got out of the car, I asked him, you're the 15th Air Force, you know the Red Tails? And he said, yes. He got very emotional. I'm here today because of those guys. And I've heard that story over and over. I think that's better than being an ace. You help people come home and stay alive and make America productive with their presence here rather than in a German prison camp somewhere. What else helped the airmen be great protectors or great pilots? I don't know if you've seen the Nova special called The Last B-24. In that story, they find a P-51 that was shot down, and the pilot was still listed as missing in action. They didn't find a body or anything, didn't know where the crash was. His daughter was interviewed and made a statement that said, yeah, the racism was so bad, the Tuskegee Airmen were forced to fly 70 missions where the other pilots could go home after flying 50 missions. And I got the call from the producer saying, is that true? And you know who I had to call? It's Harry Stewart. Saying, is that true? And he said, give me a minute. And he came back with this story. He said, no, that's not true. Benjamin O. Davis made that request of the 15th Air Force. He says, I can't get replacements fast enough. My guys fly their 50 missions and they go home, and I can't get a replacement. So I need to force them to stay another 20 missions until replacements come. Why were they not getting replacements? The only place you could train as an African American was at Tuskegee. And Tuskegee only had so much throughput. You only put so many pilots through the process. So that was how racism hampered or made that 70 versus 50 missions possible. But it didn't come from the 15th Air Force. It came from the commander of the Tuskegee Airmen realizing if I let the guys go back at 50 missions, I'm going to be short-staffed. So we dispelled that myth, and it wasn't put into that special. So Harry Stewart gets to the combat theater late in the war. And before he got there, interesting thing, and this story I asked him to put in his book. He says, it was Christmas. He was probably, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years old. And he gets a gift of, I believe, the Indian outfit. And his neighbor across the street got the cowboy outfit. And Christmas morning, they came out fighting each other. Both became Tuskegee Airmen, later in life. So I just thought that was interesting. In Tuskegee, you had your sectors of practice. So we can go out and we can practice. And if anyone comes into your sector, it's an automatic dogfight. You have no bullets, of course, but you're trying to get on the other's tail. And when you do that, you've won the dogfight. So Harry's out flying, and here comes this airplane, and he challenged the airplane to a dogfight, and within one turn, that airplane's on Harry's tail. He wags his wings in defeat and heads for base. That airplane follows. and they both land. They pull up to the revetment. Harry gets out of his airplane, pulls off his helmet. And the other pilot gets out of their airplane, pulls off their helmet, and flaming red hair falls down over her shoulders. He had been beat by a wasp. So that's how good those ladies could fly, but it was things like that that made our pilots great. They used to also contend with the F-4 pilots, and after one of them stalled and crashed, their commander called the Tuskegee Airmen base and said, let's calm this down, let's not do this anymore. Let's save these guys for combat. They got a lot of practice because the Army Air Corps really didn't know what to do with them, and it took them a while to get from training to combat. So we're on the day of Harry's mission, his last mission, I believe it was. And they've done their job escorting bombers. Now it's time to go for targets of opportunity, as they called it. This is where you have a nearly full complement of ammo, plenty of fuel. Now we're going to go down to the ground and see what we can destroy of the German war machine. So they catch some airplanes landing at a German airfield, and they go in to shoot them down. And it was just a ploy. The Germans knew that this happened, so they put some up high, and these guys up high came down, and that's how Harry's group was attacked. When the word was called for break, he had to break, and his wingman turned tail and ran for home. So now Harry is contending with 3, and he shoots 2 down, and he's being chased by the 3rd one. So he figures he's gone, and he talks about all these emotions that go through his mind and his body. And the only thing he can do is dive to the ground and turn. And he does that, finds trees, he's going to turn in between these trees. I guess that gives him a point of view to sight on. And he gets into a turn, and the German behind him gets into an accelerated stall, and stalls and crashes into the ground. Now, I fly the North American T6, and I go up with an instructor, and he has me practice that accelerated stall. We're going along, he says, turn the airplane over and pull. And it will do that. It'll get up there, shake, and fall out of the sky, and you have to recover. So we do that at speed and then at low speed, just so you can practice recovering. But that's how Harry got his third kill. And then his buddy, Carl Carey, was high above and called his 6 clear. And then he could relax and went for home, and that's how he got 3 kills in one day. So I say that's flying skill, to know when your airplane is at the buffet and about to stall. I did go down to Stallion 51 and took their training course, and they pound that into you. Let's go fly in the buffet. And at certain speeds, the buffet margin is about that. And then you get to other speeds, the margin comes really close to, you're going to stall if you don't stay within that margin. So that P-51 is very picky when you're at those margins. So Harry comes home, and he's teaching at Tuskegee Army Airfield. He's an instructor in the T6. So our T6, he actually sat in the back and instructed while he was there at Tuskegee, came back from combat. And so we have his name on that airplane. Then the group is moved to Lockbourne Air Force Base in Columbus, Ohio. the plan was to get the 477th Bomber Group. You all have heard of the 477th Bomber Group? Well, not too many people raised their hands, so I'll tell you a little bit about the 477th Bomber Group. There was a guy named Lewis Lynch. He was tall and skinny. And they washed him out of the P-51 program. He was just too big. His head hit to the canopy. And his mother was friends with Eleanor Roosevelt's maid. And she wrote a letter to her friend and says, "Tell Eleanor, we got to do something because my son is getting washed out." She went to her husband, and that's how the 477th Bomber Group got started. Now he can sit comfortably in that B-25, as tall as he was. The 477th had a hard time. They were shipped from base to base. Consider this. You had a pilot and co-pilot, that's 2 officers. You had a bombardier and a navigator, 2 more officers. Now you have 4 times the number of officers on base who were African American, wanting access, as was their right by military regulation, to the officers' club. And the commanders on these bases said, "No, we can't have that." And when the airmen protested, "I want these guys out of here," so they would ship them to another base. They could never get training going. It was always something hampering them. Once they were sent to a base with 1 runway. And now you can only fly on certain days, because you can only fly when the wind is favorable. They never got to see combat. In April of '45, right at the end of the war, they got tired of it. And one of the former mayors in Detroit, Coleman Young, said, "We're going to organize a protest." He said, 2 by 2, we're going to the officers' club, we're going to get entrance, we're going to sit down, we're going to order, and then see what happens. And the first night, guys got in, sat down, ordered. The base commander got word of that and said, "Here's an order that says, you're not going to that officers' club, you're going to the other one I created for you, and sign this order." Some of the airmen signed, some of the airmen didn't sign. The next night, they went 2 by 2 and were summarily arrested, put under house arrest. And over the next few nights, it got up to like 106 people, officers arrested. There's record of traffic between the base commander and the Pentagon. The base commander was trying to call on a wartime law that said if you disobey a direct order in wartime, you can be put before a firing squad. And the Pentagon said, "No way." But the airmen didn't know that. They were put on C-47s and flown, they didn't know where they were going, but they were flown away from Freeman Field, Indiana. I believe they went to Kentucky. When they got there, they were under armed guard, behind barbed wire. Guess who was walking around free in the town with a big P on the back of their jacket? It was German prisoners of war. And you'd go to the theater, and the German prisoners of war could sit down with the audience. The African Americans had to go up to the balcony. That was very frustrating for some of the men. But that's the story of the 477. The Freeman Field Mutiny. Now there is, the war's over, 477 is fully trained. Well, actually the war is not quite over, but the war in Germany is over. And the idea was to put the 332nd Fighter Group with the 477th Bomber Group and send them over to Japan. Now that one I wanted to see. Black men escorting black men in bombers. How many bombers would they have lost? Maybe none, I don't know. But it would have been a good thing to see. And it never happened because the war ended, thanks to Enola Gay dropping this atomic bomb. And I'm sure we all wish it would have just stopped right there. There was no more war. But it didn't happen. So they're at Lockbourne. It's 1949. The armed services have been integrated by the president. And Benjamin Davis gets a call. He says, we want you to pick 3 of your best pilots and 1 alternate and send them to Las Vegas for a competition. It's called the gunnery meet. And this was the year of 1949. So Harry Stewart is chosen, James Harvey was chosen, and Alva Temple. Alva Temple was the lead. And then Halbert Alexander was the backup pilot. So they got in their P-47s and they flew to Las Vegas, Nevada. Their crew chiefs, were in C-47s and flew into Las Vegas. This was a test of pilot skill and mechanic skill. The rule was if you have a malfunction and have to return to base, you'll just be disqualified for that competition. They did several things. So it's aerial gunnery at 20,000 feet, aerial gunnery at 10,000 feet. Then there was skip bombing, rocketry, and 1 or 2 other exercises to show pilot skill. On the first day, 332nd was in the lead, had the most points. Second day, third day, fourth day, they ended up winning the competition. Then came the award ceremony. So you go to the hotel in Las Vegas. Now, at this time, still, African Americans can't go to the hotel. You can be a waiter, you can be a cook, but you can't go into the hotel. So these guys were ushered into a room, they took a picture with the trophy, and then ushered back to base. And everyone else went on with the ceremony. The winner for 1949 gunnery meet was listed as unknown in the 70s. And someone pointed that out to Harry Stewart. And he started doing research, trying to find where the trophy was, where the records were. And it wasn't until 2004 that a young lady named Zellie Orr actually found the trophy. It was in a box in the basement or in a storage room at the Air Force Museum in Dayton. So they brought it out, they shined it up. We were having an annual dinner that year, and we asked them to bring it. And pretty much under guard, they brought the trophy to Detroit, and we invited the participants in that gunnery meet to come and touch the trophy. Now, Alva Temple had passed, and Halbert Alexander had passed, but we had Alva Temple's family and Halbert Alexander's brother came, but Harry Stewart was there and James Harvey was there. And they got reunited with that trophy. Now we of course made a replica of the trophy, which is displayed in our museum. The original is at the Air Force Museum in Dayton. They have a nice display, much like you do here, about the Tuskegee Airmen. And believe me, we all appreciate the exhibits around the country that talk about the Tuskegee Airmen. It's such an important story, especially in light of the current president trying to get rid of all DEI. The airmen prove that when
Thank you for bringing that up.
What do you say?
Thank you for bringing that issue up.
The airmen prove that when you include people in the process, you allow diversity. I don't know if you knew there was actually a group of Mexican Americans who were flying P-47s. That the excellence of the whole United States military is improved. when you allow them into the process, give them the training, and then let them prove themselves. We all have seen Band of Brothers, correct? And they rightfully claim we didn't need rescuing in Bastogne. But it was the 761st Tank Battalion who kind of spearheaded Patton's drive from wherever he was in the south up to Bastogne, so that they could say, we know you don't need rescuing, but we're here to give you a break. You guys can go and rest, and we'll take it from here. 761st Tank Battalion was an all-black tank battalion that did 181 days continuous combat, unheard of in the United States military, because that was Patton. If you were with Patton and you were a white tank battalion, you were going to do 181 days continuous combat. That's just the kind of general he was. Then you had the triple nickel, who never got to combat, but when you consider America fighting forest fires today, the triple nickel taught America how to fight forest fires. In other words, these were paratroopers who jumped out of airplanes. Oop, we messed up. We lost a few guys in that fire. Let's try this method. So they developed the methods to fight forest fires that are still used today. Who else did we have? Military units in World War II. Well, the group my father was in. Sorry?
Red Ball Express.
The Red Ball Express. Yeah, those were truck drivers. Now you think, okay, that's a pretty safe job, but no, these guys were actually going behind German lines because America was advancing so fast, you had pockets of Germans, and they had to go through or around, and they were subject to combat, being captured. So that was another group. I developed a knack for talking to World War II veterans. And I was dating a young lady. I went to pick her up, and her father was in the yard doing yard work. And, you know, I let her know I was there. I was talking to her father, found out he was a driver in the Red Ball Express. When she finally came out the house, he was in tears. She said, "How did you get him this song? He never talks about World War II." And I said, "Well, I just asked a few questions, and he opened up." So he found someone who understood, even though I've never been to combat. He found someone who understood, and he opened up, and he was a member of the Red Ball Express. Now, growing up with a father who was World War II POW, this was, I was a teenager in the Vietnam era, and man, I wanted to go to combat and be a hero like my father, because he's my biggest hero. Harry Stewart is my second biggest hero. And I convinced my friends, let's get our BB guns, let's put on our helmets, because we all drove motorcycles with our face shields, let's put on extra clothing, and let's have combat. So we divided ourselves into teams, and man, I thought I was going to whoop. And I was the first one dead. And that kind of showed me that you go to combat, that's up to the Lord, whether you survive or not. Your skill, yeah, some people get a chance to show the bravery. And that's why we give them that Congressional Medal of Honor. But man, if a bomb hits in the right place, there may be nothing left of you. So when I got 18 and thought I had to go register for the draft, I said, well, I'll go do this. And I got to the draft board, and they said, oh, you don't have to register anymore. This was 1975. And I said, goodbye to the military. When my brother, who was older than me, when his number came up, and we got to the circle as a family, the morning he was to enroll, and that's when the first time I saw my father cry. He actually broke down and cried because he knew what his son was going into if he had gone to Vietnam. And I don't know, it still gets to me today to have seen that. So when my turn came, I was, well, I don't need to do it, and I never did join the military. people think I am military. They think I'm been in the Army, and I always get asked that question. Maybe because I had this POW raising me. A lot of peculiarities that he had. So in the World War II Museum, there's a display of spoons. And the curator of that exhibit, when I went to visit at its opening, they said, we were wondering, why are we getting all these spoons from former POWs? And she finally asked my father, why? And he said, when we came back, we had lost all etiquette. The spoon was the most efficient utensil. You could cut with it, nothing leaked through the forks. It was the best thing to use. And he saved it. And now they have a whole display of spoons from POWs. My grandmother had to sit down with him and tell him, Rothaker, you have to use the fork and the knife, and this is how you do it, and this is how you talk to people, because, you know, when your life is on the line, you know, daily, you start thinking in very short, succinct terms, and that's a character trait that I picked up from my father. Although tonight I'm rambling on and on. Living with the Tuskegee Airmen teaches you that also, that you tell stories. See, what time is it? 8:30. It's about time for me to quit. I always fuss at preachers in church. You're going on too long. Shorten it up. So let's open the floor for some questions if you have any. If not, I'll talk for a few more minutes. Yes, sir.
You didn't tell us anything about your museum and where it's located.
Okay, we can do that. We're in 3 locations in Detroit, much like you have here on your campus. We put our museum inside the Charles H. Wright Museum. And that came about from the Ford Philanthropy now. It used to be Ford Fund. They came to our museum and said, you guys haven't changed anything in a few years, let's update it. And let's give it to Charles H. Wright to curate. And we went to the original airmen, they said, no, never give up the exhibit. So they just decided to put our exhibit or our museum in their museum. The Charles H. Wright doesn't have enough room for airplanes. So we have now 17 flying airplanes at Detroit City Airport. 4 are World War II trainers. 5 are motor gliders that we fly in formation. And the others are Cessna trainers, because we have a Part 61 flight school where we have 18 students, 6 of which we're going to put into a robust program to get them their pilot license before they go to college. 4 of them have been accepted at HBCUs that have flight programs, and 1 has her flight training paid for all the way to CFI.
Wow.
And that is amazing. And this young man here, we hope to get into the flight program also. So that's how active we are. We have partnerships with Detroit Public Schools, so we're in the schools teaching drones and aviation. Some of the high schools around the area for Inkster, Michigan, where we go and teach aviation, trying to increase the number of pilots because there is a shortage. And it looks like Michigan, Aviation Museum is doing the same with all the young people we see here tonight. And the third is the original building that was opened in 1987, which is now storage. And if we have someone who sends in a bunch of artifacts, we can lay them out there on a table there and start to curate them. Another project we have is a P-39 we didn't find it, but someone found it in Lake Huron, told us about it, We have a partnership with the state of Michigan to recover the aircraft and actually preserve it. So we have a P-39 Air Cobra. We have the 4 machine guns, 2 under the wings, 2 on the fuselage, which caused the accident, and the 37mm cannon, which is still straight. There's another wreck, and the cannon is bent, the way it came out of the airplane. This airplane lost a propeller blade because bullets actually shot it off. The propeller blade was the first thing that came on. Now imagine the vibration when one of 3 blades is gone. It is my belief the pilot was unconscious or dead before he hit the water. The airplane was actually coming apart before it hit the water. We have a debris field that's several acres, and it goes out like a V. And that first artifact is that propeller, and then we start getting other pieces here and there. So we have the engine, carburetor, the instrument panel, the control stick. The wing is still there, with the gear tucked up in the wing. Air is still in the tires. Pitot tube is bent, but it's pretty, the end of it is bent. So it's down there waiting for us to recover. And we're just making room for it. In order to bring that stuff up, you have to let the muscles, the zebra muscles and whatnot, die off naturally or without any assistance. Otherwise, they leave marks on the metal. So it requires a bath. The engine is in a pool, and we have to make a pool for the wing. It would need to be 40 feet long, 15 feet wide, and at least 3 feet deep. And so we're just waiting for the room for that.
How deep was that? Right.
It was only in 30 feet of water. You could almost snorkel it. And because of that, I was one of the divers to go down. I'm a member of the National Association of Black Scuba Divers. Another outcome of segregation. So back in the 60s, we just didn't get the joy or the welcome joining dive groups, so we formed our own. And that's happened a lot in the African American community. You have the National Medical Association, the National this, and the National that. And when you have that word national in front of it, it's pretty much an African American organization formed because we were not welcomed into other organizations. Now that's not so much anymore. The guys I fly with are just as kind and welcoming, and I never felt ostracized anytime I got to a new place when other people did. And I just had this iron personality. You can wear too many chips on my shoulder. But it's been fun flying with the Screaming Rebels. I imagine that. A black man flying with the Screaming Rebels. But these are guys in Michigan who had a formation group. You may know some of them. Bruce Coe is one who I fly with today. And Ron Staley out of Howell, Michigan. And Dan Schiffer, the Schiffer brothers, if any of you remember them. These were some formidable flyers back in their day. And now I'm in that group. When I go to Oshkosh, I'm one of 2 or maybe 3 African Americans in the show briefing getting ready to fly in the air show at Oshkosh. There just aren't many of us there. So that segregation and policies and whatnot, it trickles down to today, and it's difficult. My hardest job in getting a young person interested in aviation is overcoming those stereotypes instilled in their head. I even had a parent, so I'm in our rocket lab, and a parent and the child and I are talking, and I start talking about my favorite subject is physics. And the parent goes, oh, no, I can't do that. And I said, stop, wait, hold it. You're instilling in your child his, fear of physics. And physics is one of the easiest sciences to study. You could actually talk yourself into the equation. And I didn't really learn this until I started teaching physics. I thought it was rough at one point, but when you get an understanding of it, and when you start to explain it in everyday terms to students, then they can grasp it. And I think I have a knack for doing that. So the hardest part is to get them to overcome those fears. My mother always talks about we're going to die in an airplane accident. So that's a fear that we have to overcome. And once you do that, you've got some very smart, intelligent young people who can fly airplanes, who can be air traffic controllers. And those are the things that we do at the Tuskegee Airmen Museum in Detroit. So it's a living museum. Hopefully for the next, 100, 200 years will be in existence. Another question, please. I've got one here and then one in the back.
How many airmen were taken prisoner of war, and how were they treated by the Germans?
So the question is, how many airmen were taken prisoners of war and how were they treated by the Germans? I'm guessing about 35, and those numbers kind of vary. Now, Harry Stewart's daughter is going to give me his notes, and that answer will be in there. It may even be in this book. So about 35 were taken, and they were actually treated okay. Even my father was treated okay. There wasn't any difference because you were black. Everyone was subject to the cold and the hunger. In fact, my dad said when he was on the ship coming home, they gave him an allowance at the confection stand, commissary. So he went and bought all these candy bars because he couldn't get full. Just couldn't get full, and then he made himself sick. So they were treated okay. In fact, when Alexander Jefferson got to prison camp, they chose him. Hey, you're going to come with us. And he's like, what? I figured you guys were going to put me, out in the back somewhere because he's black. And he said, no, we realize you are not a spy. You're an American. So he got treated well by his fellow airmen who were in that camp. Question in the back.
Yeah, how about your presence at air shows around the country?
Good question.
Are there aircraft decked out with the red tail? That's what I was curious about. That might do presentations at air shows.
I think we have about 4 aircraft decked out in red tail. Kermit Weeks has one down in Florida, Fantasy of Flight. The CAF Red Tail Squadron has one. And the Erickson Collection out in the Northwest has one.
And when you say CAF, you mean Confederate Air Force?
Well, it used to be Confederate. Now, if they had said Confederated, but no, it was Confederate Air Force. Now, how the Red Tail got started, they came to the airmen. I was just a young, early 20-something, didn't even have my pilot license, hadn't even started flight lessons. But they came to the airmen and said, hey, we'll build or rebuild a P-51 Mustang, paint it red, and fly it around and tell your story. That was a great thing at the time because their children some of them were becoming airline pilots, but nobody was into the warbird thing. And the original Tuskegee Airmen gave the Commemorative Air Force permission to use their story to raise money to rebuild or restore a P-51, and they have a P-51C model. And that's how the Red Tail Squadron got started. We have, as I said, the historic aircraft, and we do fly in air shows. We were static display at the Cleveland Air Show. We were always at Oshkosh. The Flint Air Show, which was about 2 years ago, we flew there. And we're getting more invitations to participate in air shows. So hopefully you'll see us around. Now the Erickson collection said, why don't we team up? Because we can bring the Red Tail P-51, you can bring the trainers, and we could sell rides for the Tuskegee experience. You can see what it's like to have flown in a Stearman, the BT-13, the T-6, then the P-51. So that's coming soon. If not this season, next. Yes?
You said earlier in the presentation that you knew some of the Tuskegee Airmen. How did you feel knowing some of the most famous World War II airmen? And did you ever have thoughts about what it must have been like flying with them?
Yes. So I did meet many of the airmen. I joined the group in the mid-'80s, and I started going to conventions. My first one was 1986. And a lot of the airmen were still alive. So if you pull up a picture, I could say, oh, I knew that one or that one. And what I would do at the convention, before the meetings would start, you know, some guys would be there having coffee, and I would just sit down and say, hey, tell me a story. And that's how I got to talk to Span Watson. Span Watson was based in Alabama and had a flat tire. So he went to the tire shop, said, I got a flat tire, you know, can you fix it? And so the attendant started to work on his tire, and then a white person came in. So the attendant put Span's tire aside and worked on his tire, and that went on pretty much the whole morning. So Span said, I'll come back tomorrow. Came back tomorrow, and the same thing happened. And the third day, he got upset and said, I need my tire fixed. And the attendant said, you gotta wait. He hauled up and hit the attendant. Realizing what he had done, lost his temper, hit this man, he scurried back to base. And as they were shipping Span out of the area, there was a group coming in to demand him for their retribution for hitting a white person. And when I was telling this story in Ohio, someone said, they weren't going to kill him. And I said, well, Span didn't realize that based on the history of lynchings in Alabama. So I learned that story that morning. We were in Seattle for a convention, and there's an online game called Aces High. There's another one called Warbirds. And when Warbirds got started, realizing Tuskegee Airmen were in town, they invited the Tuskegee Airmen to come to their studio, and they put us in little pods, and you had fighter pilots and bomber pilots, and you flew online to fly a mission. That's how I got to fly with some of the famous Tuskegee Airmen on a mission.
How did you do?
Horrible. I didn't understand the online game, and some of the airmen did horrible too. It's an online game. This is not like a real airplane. Now the other distinction I have with flying with airmen that I brag about, I just started bragging about this year, is I was in a room full of African American airline pilots. And I said, I've done something you guys haven't done. And I'm like, what? You don't even fly big airplanes. said, I flew formation with Harry Stewart from Detroit to Oshkosh and landed in the rip-on approach, rip-on arrival. That's a tough arrival for a pilot. But then to do it in formation, I was lead in one glider. Harry Stewart was my wingman in the second glider. And I'm probably the only, person my age, or even the age of anyone in this room, who can say they flew formation with the Tuskegee Airmen in airplanes or in aircraft. They weren't airplanes, they were gliders. So that's a distinction I have flying with the airmen. Have I dreamed and imagined? Yes. About flying with the airmen. What would it be like? What would I do in the face of combat? Yes, I've thought about that a lot. But don't let it intrigue you. Go ahead and get that education. Become an airline pilot. War is just, it's no good. Yes?
How do you get from Detroit to Oshkosh in a glider?
Well, you fly from here to Benton Harbor, you refuel, and you fly around the bottom of the lake, past Chicago, and now you're out over the water, about 2,500 feet, so you can see the Sears Towers, and Harry Stewart snapped a picture of me in the lead with the Sears Tower in the background. Then you get into one of those little towns, I can't remember the name. You land there and you refuel before you get into Oshkosh, just in case something happens. And that year, something happened. There was a fatal accident on the runway, and they shut the airport down at Oshkosh. So we were in the air, very close to Oshkosh, and they told us to go to over Green Lake and hold. And we want one group at this altitude and another group at that altitude. And people are, I don't know, folks might be running out of gas, or they're trying to cut line, and folks were going from this altitude to that altitude, flying faster than they should have been. It was really chaotic. And I had done the rip-on arrival before, so I was pretty calm. Harry Stewart was relying on me. And we finally got called out of the hold to land at Oshkosh. So that was an eventful day, one I'll always remember. Any other questions? Yes, I'm sorry.
What's tough about this rip-on arrival?
So you're approaching it, and you don't give your tail number, and you don't really say anything. They just say, okay, red, Cessna, rock your wings. Now they know they got you. 90 knots, and you continue in. You don't even know what runway you're landing at. Then you get to another checkpoint, and they say red Cessna, runway 27. And now you've got to maneuver your way to runway 27 or to runway 36 or 18. So it's a little bit of the unknown, and you have people converging from all over the country to this point to get into the line to go into rip-on. And you can follow the railroad tracks, but you have to watch the guy in front of you. If you're slow, you got to watch the guy behind you. If you're fast, you got to slow the airplane down, fly it at that slow. So it's intimidating to most pilots, and I say, well, if you can't do that, you probably couldn't be a fighter pilot.
I just had a question about how do they come about picking red for tail? Was there a story behind that?
Not really. They always ask that question. It was just the color of soccer.
Arbitrary.
Yeah. You had candy stripe or you had checkerboard, black and white checkerboard. You had yellow stripe. They gave the squadrons characteristic colors so that you could tell who was escorting you. Yes.
Do you think that some of the airmen ever thought about quitting because of the racism they met?
I've never heard of an airman quitting.
What do you think they would have thought about it?
I'm pretty sure they did. I mean, I may have thought about it, but these guys were so into proving that they could do it because they were told they couldn't. that they just pressed on. And that's one of the characteristics I like about them is their perseverance. And that's something I adopted in my life. I was not a good student. Yeah, I have a PhD, it's in biomedical engineering, but man, the road it took me to get there. And the reason it took me so long is because I never developed the discipline of studying every day. I would study when a test would come. And then you forget the information when the final comes. So that discipline every day, I had to learn the hard way. And when my algebra teacher allowed you to sleep in algebra class, if you can't do algebra, you can't do calculus. If you can't do calculus, you can't do differential equations. And if you can't do differential equations, you can't be an engineer. And that's my first degree, mechanical engineering. I could tell the instructor all about the theory, but because I didn't know algebra, I couldn't pass his test. So, students, every day, study, discipline, and you won't mess up like I did.
A quick one. When they started flying at Tuskegee in '42, were the instructors African American as well, or was there a mix?
It eventually came to a mix. So some of the guys who finished early in this William Valley training program became instructors.
Yeah, sure.
If you are a pilot in Michigan, and have been for several years, you may remember a fix called Cargill. Gilbert Cargill was the Tuskegee Airmen, and they actually named a fix after him, an approach to Detroit City Airport. So we had Roscoe Draper, who recently passed. And I was flying my airplane, I was in Nashville, Tennessee, ran into Roscoe Draper, you know, in his late 80s, still flying. Harry Stewart was flying in his late 80s also. So yeah, they eventually had African American instructors. Was there another question? We are getting close to 9 o'clock.
Did any of the Tuskegee Airmen, like Harry, did they tell you what drew them to want to fly? You know, all young people. Any stories like that?
Alexander Jefferson, it was the extra $50 a month. I had him in the airplane, and you want to fly? He was like, no. Harry Stewart, yeah. Give me the controls. So I've had Harry Stewart in the back of the T6 also. And regrettably, I didn't give him the controls. I wanted to show him how I could fly. So I think we're
Any other questions?
close to closing. And I saw some people sleeping. Good thing this wasn't algebra class.
Thank you so much for an incredible storyteller, and thank you all for coming to this evening's program. Don't forget we have these programs on the first Wednesday evening of most months, not all months, most months. Next month's program will be held on Wednesday, June 4th. We will feature Captain Neil Hansen. He'll be speaking about 1975, the fall of Southeast Asia. Tickets for this program will be on sale tomorrow morning via the museum's website, and you'll be getting email blasts too about that as well. One last thing, please don't forget about the donation boxes that we have. We can't continue with these programs without the support from you guys, so we really appreciate it. If you have questions about this program or about the museum or membership in general here, I'm happy to help. And I hope that you all have a safe drive home, and thank you again for coming.